Uh, Good evening for most of you, I think. Good morning for a few of you. Hey, Chris, I see you. Um, my name is John Alvin Wilkins, and I am going to be doing the very last slot in DrupalCon Global here, talking about progressively decoupled Drupal 8 with GraphQL and Twig. Um, I work for Amazy Labs and I live in Taiwan, which means that it is 8:15 a.m. here. And while it sounds like, hey, I just got up early and presented, no, I've been at this watching sessions all day, or all night, I guess. So I'm about 8 hours past my bedtime. um, but yeah, thanks for showing up. I'm gonna stay awake for at least another 45 minutes, hopefully. Um, and yeah, I'm probably forgetting something, but that's because yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you for coming. And let's get started. Assuming I can get my slides to work. There we go. So what are some problems with push, right? This is the way that Drupal does its rendering. You know what? I just remembered that I got to turn off the AC because it's really loud. And it's, okay, there we go. What are some problems with push? This is the traditional way that Drupal does its rendering, and it makes things a little difficult for the front end. So let's have a look at how Drupal handles a typical request. Wow. A user is going to ask for a particular page. That's going to come in and it's going to be handled by the back end. It's going to get some initial data. And then relatively cool thing where all these other modules additional data to the page, and it has like a decorator pattern, and then it pushes that data through to the front end, and the front end gets a chance to modify all that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before it's returned to the user. By the way, if you like those really cool cats there, those are the ally cats. There's a link there for learning more about that. So what we have is all of the data is basically, it's pushed through the front end. And this can cause some problems for our front end. So let's take a closer look at that interface between the back end and the front end in Drupal. More specifically, on the back end, what we have is a data structure holding all of our data called the render array. This is part of the render API that was introduced in Drupal 7. And this is a PHP array that is, it's nested, it's a deeply nested array. And each little chunk of data is added by the functionality inside inside all of our modules, right? And so like the node module will add a chunk of data, and then nested inside there we'll have like the date field and taxonomy data and text field data. This is makes a lot of sense, right? So each of our in our backend, all of our code has been organized into these little functional modules, and we're storing that data in the same sort of methodology. Now, it makes sense. I mean, that the front end would want to do the same thing, right? It wants to have its little chunks of code to be organized logically, just like our back end is. And the way that we do it on the front end, of course, is organized by design and behavior, right? So each of our front end pieces of code is called a component, and we have like one component that's just like this side navigation, has the styling and the behavior of what you want to have for your navigation on the side of the page, right? Or the event, which is just styling the event chunk of data, right? And the problem is that with the render API, we have to it forces us to render it to HTML in order to get at it in the front end. that makes it really hard to actually use the HTML that we want inside the front end. Ideally, we would be providing the HTML for the data, and instead the render array has all these hints about what HTML is actually being used. And so instead of having one piece of HTML, the event, we actually have to go and modify the node HTML and the date field HTML and the taxonomy HTML, and the text field HTML, all these different files that we have to modify in order to get the exact HTML that we want, instead of just writing it in one file. So it actually becomes quite complicated and difficult to achieve. And this fundamental mismatch, this is the problem that I've been struggling with the front end of Drupal since Drupal 8 came out. Twig is amazing, but there's I was finally ready to start thinking about how do we get our components to be fully formed components, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS all combined and organized by components. This is a method that people have been using in the front end for a long time. Drupal 7, most of us basically just punted. We had our JavaScript and our CSS sort of encapsulated, but our HTML was spread across all of the different not HTML Twig files. They were like tpl.php files, right? So this problem is one that I'm still struggling with. And basically, so far I've gone through 3 different solutions for this, and I want to talk about how we try to solve this problem. First version that I tried to do was a Twig conversion. Basically, you still have the same backend, but on the front end, you're adding a layer of custom Twig that sits in between our components, which are fully formed components. You have a Twig file for your HTML, you have your CSS, JavaScript, all organized by components. So an event has all of this stuff in it. And then in between the backend render array and our component, we have this custom Twig file, which is responsible for converting the render array into multiple new variables that the event component wants. So like there's an event Twig file and it wants a specific set of data variables that just have the data. And it's going to be then in charge of all the HTML. And our custom Twig is converting the render array into the specific variables for the event component. And it's also doing this routing of, because our backend doesn't know where the event Twig file is, we have to route it to it by like including it, right? This works really well, except it requires an expert level of Twig knowledge, and it also requires an expert level of render API knowledge. Like I can do this, but like, I really had a hard time suggesting that this is the way that we want to do all of our front ends in Drupal 8, because it was hard. I did a site like this right when D8 came out, and it stopped me in my tracks as far as like recommending this as a practice. I did it once and I was like, yeah, this works, but that's a pretty big caveat for a solution for the Drupal in general. Couple Drupal. This was started working in Amazy Labs. Yay. And we were doing a lot of decoupling Drupal at the time. So we had a separate front end, which was written in React, and our request would come in, and it would do a GraphQL query. GraphQL is amazing. I really like it. It allows you to specify exactly the data that you want by writing this little GraphQL query, and which I will show you later in some more slides here. And it sends that query to the backend, and you get the data that you want returned to the front end, and then you send the response on, right? So really nice. I mean, like we can organize our front end however we want to do, and it's really nice. There are problems though still. The sort of biggest problem is that um, forms are a thing, and Drupal is really good at handling forms. If you've got forms in Drupal, it does all of the like security handling issues that you would have for forms, and like it form submissions become super easy. You don't have to. It just makes things so much easier. This is the forms API that we've had since Drupal. Oh, geez, I think we got it in Drupal 5 actually. Forms API. And it's what eventually merged and became Render API in Drupal 7, by the way. But like Forms API is nice, and you don't get to use it at all when you have a decoupled Drupal site, unless you like try to figure out ways to like embed like in an iframe or something. There's some funky solutions that you could use to try and get it in there. But it's just not super straightforward, right? So here's the third solution that I've been working on with people at Macy Labs who've written this crazy sounding module, GraphQL _ Twig module. And the way that it works is it's a full Drupal site. Your request comes in. Data is retrieved by the backend and pushed to the front end, and then inside a Twig file on your front end, you do a GraphQL query back to the backend to get the data that you want and pull it into your front end, right? This actually solves a lot of problems, right? You can still do forms because the backend is still pushing data through to the front end, but now we have these additional GraphQL queries that are pulling data into the front end as well. Let's see, got 15 minutes in, half an hour left. I'm going to get into more detail about the implications of all of this stuff because it's not immediately obvious. But first, I want to talk about what a privilege it is for me to be able to speak today. I've been to a lot of different DrupalCons and always been given opportunities to show off my knowledge. And I want to spend like 1 minute, talking about how tech is not neutral, right? The society that we live in doesn't have equity. And you know what? I'm actually going to quote Jacqueline Gibson from earlier today, who said that our society lacks equity, and until we fix that, so will our technology, right? These are two resources that I found really useful. There is a podcast, which is this first one, the Scene on Radio podcast. They devoted their entire second season to this topic called Seeing White, and it talks about the history of the United States specifically, and European colonialism before that, setting up what is a total fiction of like race, and it goes through and sort of spells out all the implications that has had on society from the very beginnings of this justification for the economics of slavery all the way through to modern day history, right? It's useful. It's a really good beginner resource if you're sort of unfamiliar with a lot of those concepts about where white supremacy came from. And a more advanced book, Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I just finished reading this beginning of this month, and it is super well written and it is super useful. So I just want to take 1 minute out of this out of this presentation to just point out that we have a lot of issues that we need to deal with with society, and it's going to make our tech better, right? So I highly recommend both of these resources. Let's jump back into GraphQL. I'm not sure that all of you have seen GraphQL, so I'm going to do GraphQL queries 101 real fast here. This is essentially what it looks like in GraphQL. You write a query, you send it to your endpoint for GraphQL, and it returns data, right? So this, yeah, I can get my mouse to work. That's amazing. Okay, so this is like the name of our query. We're just calling it query. And then inside the brackets, we're requesting specific data from our endpoint. And each of these spots in this inside this query are called fields, right? And you can see that we're requesting a potato piece of data, and specifically we want the leaves data of the potato. Any fields that are on the root level of our query, like they're not nested inside any other fields, those are called root fields. Hence, my potato, radish, carrot pun here. Root field, yeah. Okay, this is 8 hours past my bedtime. These are the jokes you're gonna get, so sorry. And that will return some data. Right? So we have the returning some emoji leaves. The radish root field is returning the spicy text. Essentially, this is what a query will look like. You can also have field arguments on a GraphQL field, right? So here you can see, I don't want like just any human. I want the human that is specifically has the ID of 1000, right? And then it give me the name and the height of that human, and use foot as the unit of measurement when you return me that data, right? So these are some other ways that you can modify GraphQL queries to get exactly the data that you want. Let's go on to the next thing. So you can see that we've written a query here that is really specific to this one human. We've hard-coded the number 1000 in the query. It is not such a good idea, but fortunately, we have this thing called field arguments. You can create a variable, right, that holds the data 1000, and then pass that to your now sort of reusable query, right? So we just specify inside our query name line here that we are creating a variable, and it's going to have this type, which is just an ID type. And then down here, we are using that variable name instead of writing 1000 here, we're writing $human ID here. So this is going to use any variables here that are specified from the top in this particular spot. And now we have reusable query. And then the last thing that I think, second to last thing I'm going to show you about GraphQL queries is aliases. Now, there's no reason why you can't, actually, wait, there's one reason, man, 8 hours past my bedtime. Okay, you are allowed to query the same thing twice, right? The GraphQL syntax says it's perfectly reasonable to query person ID 5 and also person ID 22 here, right? This is completely allowed. So you can get 2 different pieces of data using the exact same query. Now, when we get the response back, you can see that this is going to be a problem because our return data is going to have 2 pieces of data that have the exact same key, right? Person is going to be the label for this data, which means you can't access both of them because in any sort of data structure in JavaScript or PHP or whatever, they're going to collide and one of them is going to get erased, right? And the way around this is with GraphQL aliases, right? So we just tell GraphQL, when you do this person query, save it in the Leah alias, right? So I can access person ID 5 by looking at the Leah key in my data structure, and I can access person ID 22 in the Boba Fett alias, right, in our data structure. Okay. GraphQL query fragments. This is when you have a chunk of GraphQL that is starting to look really redundant because this is the actual GitHub GraphQL endpoint query that you can use. I can log in GitHub user query and tell them that this is me. I don't want to get my full name from the user part of the graph, and then I want to get some information about Amazing Labs, and I also want to get information about the KSS node organization, right? And I want to get the same data from Amazing Labs as I do from the KSS node organization, and I can reuse this chunk of GraphQL by creating a fragment. So I just say fragment, and then I'm just going to name my fragment org fragment, and then tell GraphQL what type of data what type of data I'm trying to get inside this fragment. So I have to say this is on organization. And I just want to get the name, URL, some repository information, right? And then I can reuse those fragments by including it in my original query here. So as long as I give the GraphQL endpoint my fragment and my query, it can stitch these together without having to duplicate this large chunk of GraphQL query. Okay, GraphQL _Twig module. This is like super easy to set up. All you need to do is do composer require Drupal / GraphQL _Twig. And once you have that installed, you can open up a Twig file and start writing some GraphQL. If you used GraphQL on the on React or some other front-end application, or like Gatsby, you know that you write those queries like inside your JavaScript files, right? So you're in React especially, you'll write the query, and in that same file you're going to be writing your HTML, right? So GraphQL Twig module takes a similar approach. You can write the query directly inside your Twig file. All you have to do is write this what looks like a comment. It starts off with the same sort of syntax as a comment in Twig, but it adds the GraphQL keyword here at the very beginning of our comment, and then it knows to parse this as a GraphQL query. So in this case, we're creating a variable inside our query, and then we're using that variable later on. And you see here that I'm using an alias. I'm querying node by ID field, and I'm creating an alias of it to be article, and then I'm grabbing the body field, and then I want the sort of safe processed version of the body field. Some of this query looks a little Drupal-y. It is. When we install the GraphQL Twig module, it automatically installs the GraphQL module. The GraphQL module is actually the endpoint that it adds to Drupal. And it does some, for the GraphQL version 3 version of it, it models a lot of Drupal's sort of core backend data modeling, and then replicates that inside the the GraphQL data structure, the GraphQL schema, right? So you're going to see a lot of things like this where it looks very, very Drupal-y. And once it does this query, you can access a variable called GraphQL variable, which has the results of the query. So we're accessing GraphQL.article because we named this alias as article. If I didn't have this alias here, I would have GraphQL.node by ID .body.processed. But because I have the article alias in there, GraphQL.article.body.processed, right? So this this is how you access stuff. Benji's asking about, wouldn't it be better to have a different GraphQL syntax? Maybe. We're using this one now. If you want to add a feature request, I am sure that Philip Melab and the other Drupal developers who are working on the GraphQL Twig module would love patches. So yeah. Oh, Jason is asking about the raw filter that we have on the end here. That is because the GraphQL Twig module is returning safe markup here because we're accessing the processed body field, not the raw body field. And I guess it's not coming through as a safe string, right? So we have to specify raw here. That is definitely something that would need to be, that could be better about the module. I kind of agree with you there. Okay. So that query that you saw, we're like, how am I supposed to know how to write that, right? Well, when you install the GraphQL module, again, it's a dependency of the GraphQL_Twig, so it automatically gets installed. It's going to add a new page into your Drupal backend in the admin section under Configuration Web Services, GraphQL Schemas Explorer, or you can just go to /GraphQL/Explorer, and it's going to open up this new tool called graphical that allows you to explore all of the data that is available to you for your new GraphQL endpoint. So on the right-hand side here, you're gonna have this like the little explorer. Basically, it shows you all the different fields that are available at the root of the GraphQL endpoint. You can sort of click into it, and it shows you all of the additional data that you can get in different types. It's basically showing you what's called the schema, the data structure of the endpoint, right? And that will allow you to really easily sort of create some queries inside this graphical tool here. I'm trying to keep an eye on time here because I want you to have questions that I can, and time for me to actually answer it. So I'm gonna skip right ahead to a demo that my coworker Stu West did that also uses the GraphQL views module. This is also super easy to install, just composer required, Drupal/GraphQL_views. Once you have that, then you can do this really neat thing. And instead of just like querying for like node data, like the title and the body field, this demo is going to show how to get related articles by using a Drupal view. And we're going to create a Drupal view that specifically knows about GraphQL. And that view then is going to expose a new field in our GraphQL schema that we can then query and pull additional data related to this node. It allows us to create this related articles. The thing here that we're trying to do is basically like we have taxonomy associated with this particular article 3, and we want to grab other articles that have the same taxonomy. Right? Okay, so let's see. Yep. Okay. So here's the views, and you can click on GraphQL and it will add a new display type to your view called GraphQL. Looks the same as a lot of other different display types. You can add filter criteria, you can add contextual filters, and you can see here that it is adding a new field and it's telling you the name of this new field is articles list GraphQL, which you can then use inside your GraphQL query. So we're querying for Node here, and then at the same time we're going to grab the data out of this view, and it's going to be using the go back in the video a touch. Let's see if I can get this right there. So when the query is run, the node variable here is going to be holding the node ID from our Twig page, and it's going to pass that on to the view as a contextual filter. Right? And then we'll be able to use that to look at the relationships of taxonomy and pull the published and data of different articles, right? So let's run this query. And you can see, in addition to the title and the body stuff that we get at the bottom here, we're also going to have this articles list GraphQL data that has information about these additional related articles. Right there, right? So it's returning the results from a GraphQL aware view that you've created in the backend. This is really slick. Stu actually gave a presentation last year at Decouple Days 2019, and he has a lot more tips and tricks about GraphQL and Twig. I kind of feel like this session is like the intro session to GraphQL and Twig, and his is like more advanced session. So definitely go watch his video if you were interested in more information about like how to like solve real problems with the GraphQL and Twig. Okay, so stop rendering properly. Whatever. Okay, so let's finish up here by looking again at this slide, right? So I was showing you examples. We had the little demo here that was just doing GraphQL queries inside Twig. But the thing about what this diagram shows you is that I was just showing off like this part of it, right? So we're inside Twig, we're doing GraphQL query, get data, and then displayed inside the Twig file. But we're still getting data from the backend being pushed to us, right? And that allows us to do a hybrid model, right? So when we want to use GraphQL, we can totally use it and grab the data, the specific data that we want. And it's can be a lot more flexible and easy to write those queries than it is to like do an entity query. I don't even know what they're called. I'm not a backend developer, right? I can do a GraphQL query, but I can't do an entity query in PHP. So this becomes, it enables front-end developers to do a lot of cool stuff with the GraphQL. And for those things that are like, just like super hard to do, like forms, like we don't have to do them using the GraphQL. We can just have Drupal push them to the front end in the same page, inside our same Drupal page, right? So on event 42, we can be having Drupal push a form. If we render inside Twig, yeah, Benji's showing off that you can do an entity query. Good for you. Okay. We could have Drupal backend push a form through to the front end in the same chunk of Twig, where we're also grabbing additional data through GraphQL. Let me show you what that looks like. This is a hybrid push and pull module. This is our page.html.twig file, which I'm sure you've seen tons of. And here we're rendering a region, right? This is a regular old Drupal region. You add some blocks to it, you use page.content, and it renders that entire region and all the content using normal Drupal rules. Right? Same with this sidebar here. But now I'm going to include this sidebar twig file. And inside there, I'm going to do a GraphQL query. Right? So that means that we can have this page where like we're going to use GraphQL for the entire header, right? And all the menus, right? And the footer. And some of the sidebars, but not all the sidebar, right? And then we're going to allow the main content to be pushed to us from Drupal, right? So this hybrid approach allows us a lot of flexibility. If we like in forms like this, oh man, just don't want it. It's so much easier to let Drupal handle the forms. So just render, a region and you're done, right? And then we can still get our GraphQL queries, right? So this is the reason why I think this approach is kind of best approach, best of both worlds here, right? So at Mazy Labs, we were using GraphQL on our React sites. We're still using GraphQL, but now we're using it inside Twig as well. So these have different use cases. Obviously, we haven't abandoned decoupled. We're still doing a lot of that when we don't need like Drupal forms, but we have like forms that are accessing different APIs endpoints. We're going to have a decoupled site, right? We're pulling some regular content from Drupal. We have all the forms on our front end, and they're sending that data off to different API endpoints that are not Drupal for forms handling. Right? That's a good reason why you would still want to use decoupled. But when you have a bunch of stuff in Drupal, this is a really good solution. So thank you. I'm going to leave the rest of the time up here, which I think is 7 more minutes for questions. I've been told by the organizer that we would not be booted out immediately. So great. What are your questions? I have not been reading the comment section super diligently, so I'm sure that I've missed a lot of questions. I'm going to start from the bottom, I guess. Let's see here. Questions. So Mark is asking, so with this approach, do you basically need to create a views-based JSON feed for any data you want to query through GraphQL? You don't need to, you can. The GraphQL module already models a lot of the Drupal data structures. So like it knows about nodes and for all of the fields that you configure in the backend, it's going to be aware that those node types and those fields are all available and they all relate to each other. And it's going to create a schema on the based on your actual configuration of your Drupal site. Right? So you can get a lot of data already just by using the GraphQL schema that comes with the GraphQL module, right? GraphQL views module allows you to create, lists of that same data that's already available. Right? So it's an extra thing that you can do. And yeah, basically they look like JSON data, but I mean this isn't actually JSON. It's JSON-like because it's PHP. You're getting PHP data. The GraphQL module is running in PHP. The query is being run, all on the server inside PHP code. It's being that array, PHP array, is being like, converted into whatever Twig considers an array. It's still PHP underneath. It's just, yeah. But it looks like JSON. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Let's go back. So they're complaining about raw, which they should. Okay, I think I got all the other dad jokes. What is going on in this? You guys are crazy in the comments. Okay. Okay, I'm looking at the new comments here for questions. Oh, somebody was asking about slides. Yes, I have a PDF of these slides. I will post them to, I think I can update the presentation on the events.drupal.org where this presentation is. I will figure out how to add a link to the slides there. Have you handled any customizations for admin UI through progressive decoupling? I have not. I know that at Amazing Labs, we've done a lot of things to improve the editor experience, not the admin UI in general, but specifically about like adding content. We've done a bunch of stuff where it makes it easier for the editor to do stuff, but we weren't using decoupled approaches for that. We're just using like regular old, PHP Drupal. Okay, and Benji asks, so one feature or bug of the push model is that it lets the site manager builder to do things like position blocks in a region. Do you lose that with this pure pull approach? The answer is no, you don't actually lose it. If I go back to, oops, and I just killed my slides by clicking on play. If I go back to this slide, please try show my window. I got to reshare my screen. What you're going to want to do is make sure that the regions that are listed inside the admin interface are the specific regions you actually want to render inside your page HTML.twig, right? So here we're rendering the page region and the sidebar first, right? So we're still giving the administrative user site builder a place to render blocks, right? So you can still configure and move them all around, all inside there, just like normal. We're just enhancing that with some stuff that is essentially, coding some other things about the sidebar by doing the GraphQL Twig. They can't change the order of the data that we're printing out inside our GraphQL query Twig stuff. But the regions are still available. You just make sure that when you write your page.html.twig, that list of regions you're printing out here in this twig file matches the regions that are defined in your theme, so that you're not having sort of a WTF moment for like, I just added all these blocks to this region and they're just not showing up anywhere, because you're not actually printing it out. That's just kind of mean. So Eric Grieve asked, does the GraphQL result data get included in the rendered twig, or does this add a server round trip? It doesn't actually add a server round trip, because the GraphQL query is being run in the back end, right? All of this is inside the Drupal process on your server, right? So the backend is running inside the process, the front end is running, so the GraphQL query is just some piece of code, just like your backend does like database queries, right? The front end is doing GraphQL queries, which basically means it says, hey, GraphQL module, I want this data, and GraphQL module goes, oh, that means I need to do this database query. So it does a database query, and then it just hands it off. So it's just as efficient as just having a module that does database queries. And it doesn't require additional server round trips, because it's all inside that same request before anything gets sent to the user. Mark is complaining about render arrays. Good for you. I hate render arrays. Oh, wait, there's a question in there too. Hold it. Sometimes I could spend forever looking through a render array trying to see if there's a way I can get at a certain piece of related data. And quite often the solution ends up, I need to go further up the chain to do an entity alter hook to pull in some related data from the like a parent entity. So maybe in theory, this might help avoid that. Yes. Actually, I would suggest you take a look at Stu's presentation, the one that I linked to, the YouTube video earlier. He has actually a lot of detailed solutions for these kind of things. And I think one of them is about doing entity queries. He like says, this is the way you would do it in traditional Drupal. And he like shows us entity query, which I don't understand. And then he says, this is the way you do it in GraphQL. And it's like 2 lines of GraphQL code. So yeah. Why not generate the JSON file? Mike Wertz is asking, why not generate the JSON file in views and parse with any JS framework you want? I mean, that's what the JSON API is. So yeah, you can do that. Go use the JSON API. It's part of the core. Let's see. Oh, we're like 1 minute over. So apparently it does not shut down. I'm scrolling down, and no time remains. The end is not. Yes, it is. Okay. So we didn't get booted. Nobody hit the refresh button. But thank you very much. I had a lot of fun, and I am headed to bed. Okay. Good night or good morning or whatever it is for you.